I partnered with my uncle in a wholesale seafood business. We earned 2.8 million yen in a year. When profits were shared, he gave me only 120,000. The post was his, and I supplied the initial capital. I put in 120,000. It's no small amount, and I didn't say a word. I hid that money in my pocket. Money that wasn't even a fraction of his profits. Fine, I'll do whatever you say. He thought I was stupid and that I would always be his cheap labor, not knowing that with that money, I rented directly the big fridge across the street, seeing his face turn pale at once. Uncle, I pulled down the blinds. From now on, everyone to his or her own side. People say that that night he stayed there at the post until dawn, banging the calculator nonstop. Oh, the figure for the year was 2 as in 8, 5 million won, exactly. The year has 5 days. We both worked in shifts and stayed up without a moment's rest, watching the seafood pools there. Total flow was over 5 million. Net profit reached 2.9 million minus a few thousand. The figure of 2.8 million is correct. The post was mine, clearly. I appointed the captain, and I also handled relations with the major hotels. You only did the hard work, indeed. He looked at me and went on, continuing. Don't look at me like that, okay? If you want assistant earning over 10 grand a month, the cap would cover his meals, housing, and social security. These 120,000 are your savings. It's not a small amount when you count wear and tear, depreciation, and debt collection management. All I did was repair those old fridges this year. I spent more than 30,000. You were right. The post and the capital were his. But of those 2 commas, 7, 3 million, how many were earned by the sweat of my brow and with my eyes fixed on the effort? He never did those calculations. I said, okay, I will do what you say. Don't overthink it. On the very first day of the new year, a neat batch of first-rate lobsters will arrive at the port at a good price. Make it to the dock early. I did not go home. I was carrying $20,000 on me. I feared my mother would ask exactly how much I earned with my uncle this year and how we split the profits. I had no way to explain it day by day as we started the partnership. He told me, we're family. We split profits equally. Where I eat, you will eat before the new year then. He said we would split it fairly too. After New Year, he said I only put in effort. I stared at that figure for a long time. That is worth all my effort. Didn't he say the position was his? Then I will have mine too. I called the market's leasing supervisor about the large 500 square meter fridge that faced the highest rent. The deposit was just 120K indeed. I already knew very well all the small-time customers downstairs. I could sign the contract within 3 days, at most, and open before New Year. That night, I placed the money on the supervisor's desk. We signed the contract that night once we had fridge keys. In my hand, I knew my destiny was no longer in anyone's hands at 4 a.m. on the first day of the year. The wind on the dock was bitterly icy. I arrived 2 hours earlier than usual. When the ship's captain docked, I approached old Z. I want this batch of lobsters paid in cash now. The captain stood dumbfounded. Oh, your uncle hadn't warned you. I've pulled out a wad of cash. Now I work for myself. I offer 5% more. I'll handle the inspection, and the cargo won't wait a minute. The captain looked at me. He fell silent for a few seconds. When my uncle arrived at the dock, it was the top-quality batch of lobsters. It was already loaded into my cold truck. He stood still on the empty dock, pale, alone. Oh, what does this mean? I shut the truck door, uncle. You didn't say it yourself, each according to his ability. Happy New Year. I hoped to start off on the right foot. The car started, and through the rearview mirror, my uncle's figure grew smaller and smaller. I knew the conflict between us was finally sealed. I took the lobsters to the fridge and selected it all night. The merchandise was of truly excellent quality. They weighed over 750 grams. The tweezers were full. When done, she sent a message to the market's retail customers in under half an hour. More than 10 people gathered in front of the fridge. All were contacts I had built up over the year. I helped anyone who needed it, and I remember every one of those favors. After inspecting the merchandise, retailers placed their orders. I sold at market price with no surcharges or hoarding within 2 hours. The entire batch of lobsters sold out. I earned 43,000 profit and recovered my investment. The cold storage room. Oh, hi there. It officially opened at 10 a.m. I received a call from my uncle. I didn't answer right away. Rumors started circulating in the market today. There he fought with his uncle and opened his own small stall. The uncle issued a sharp threat. Whoever dares to trade with him should forget getting goods from him later. Offending his uncle is how you survive in this harsh market. By noon, retailers began calling to cancel their orders now. Everyone spoke in a hurried tone, saying they had trouble at home and would not buy any merchandise. For the moment, I understood what was happening. I said nothing else and returned the deposits in full by 3 in the afternoon. My uncle appeared with a number of old market stall owners and blocked the entrance to my refrigerated chamber. Pointing a finger at me, he called me ungrateful. He said that he had pulled me from the field that taught me hand-to-hand business, and that I paid him poorly. People began to crowd around us, all looking for the show. I didn't argue over the 20, like Jew today. I only calmly asked what the uncle wanted. He was left speechless, but finally he launched a threat, saying that the ship captains would, yes. The big clients in the market wouldn't dare bargain with me while I waited to close today. He turned around and left. The other owners followed him, and the crowd dispersed gradually. The whispers didn't stop. I stood in front of the cold room, watching their backs. I've been fighting in this market for a year. Which ship docks and when, which retailer needs goods, I know it better than anyone. My uncle thinks that he has my life under control, but he doesn't know that real relationships are earned with effort. They are not kept by threats. That night, I hung my sign for wholesale aquatic products. The 5 large letters looked directly at my uncle's stall, glittering under the bright night lights. I also posted a market entrance ad, hiring a worker with a monthly salary. It includes meals and comfortable lodging and social security. If you work well, there are generous year-end bonuses the next morning. A young man named Sean came to apply for the job. He had just left his hometown to work, and in his eyes, I saw the same longing I had years ago. I looked at his hands, full of calluses. He was someone who could endure hard work. I hired him on the spot and told him to start in the afternoon after the shift. While I stayed in the cold room checking the inventory, the refrigeration machines hummed and the temperature stayed steady at 5 below zero. I watched my uncle's stall across from me. It was lit with people coming and going. It seemed a thriving business, but I knew that without me, those old refrigeration machines wouldn't last long that summer when it was hotter. He only knew how to keep the books. He only knew how to negotiate relationships. I pulled out my phone and opened up my contact list. I kept the numbers of more than a dozen captains from other ports, all known this year. My uncle thought he could utterly suffocate me by cutting the local supply. He doesn't know this world is very big, and that there isn't just one dock outside the chamber. Night fell. I lowered metal shutter and turned the key. Tomorrow at 3 in the morning. I must drive 200 kilometers to Ngan Port, where Captain promised to keep a batch of frozen fish. The third opening day came. My mother was standing in front of a refrigerated cabinet with a thermos. Her hair was whiter than New Year's Day. She counted the merchandise with Sealin and then saw it. She almost dropped the accounting book. My mother kept mum. She only placed the thermos on the table. Inside was the rib soup that I liked the best. She looked around. She saw a 500 square meter cold storage and AG sign hanging on the wall. With her eyes reddened, she asked Lynn to keep working, and I pulled a chair up to my mother. He sat in silence for a long while, until finally he asked me if it was true that I had fought with my uncle. I nodded. A little later, my mother sighed, saying that yesterday my uncle came home, cried before her for 2 hours, saying I am ungrateful, that after working hard for a year with me, I took his business and blocked his goods, driving him to ruin. My mother said your uncle asked me to persuade you to move the refrigeration unit and go back to working with him. You promised to raise your bonus, giving you $200 a year. When it was over, I said nothing. I only pulled a folder from the drawer, and I handed it to my mother. Inside were my work records for the whole year, every purchase invoice, every repair invoice, every collection call log, and the refrigerator's maintenance log. I marked the key points with a red pen last July. Unit 3's compressor failed. I spent 36 hours repairing it, while my uncle played Milan in the air-conditioned room in September. A restaurant owed 150,000 lus. I ran around for half a month to collect it. My uncle said it was my duty in November. The merchandise arrived at 2 in the morning. I unloaded 3 tons of seafood. I only injured my back for a month, and my uncle only came to settle the accounts the next day. My mother was leafing through those receipts, and her hands began to tremble. I told him that of the 365 days in the year, together with my uncle, actually I did 80% of the work with a total billing of more than 5,001 in net profit of 2,150,000. My uncle gave me, saying that I had only put in the effort. Tears welled up in my mother. She closed the folder and stood up without a word. She turned around and left, quietly. She knew where she was going by 4 o'clock that afternoon. Shouts rang out in the market. My mother blocked the entrance to my uncle's stall in front of everyone there. She asked him how much work had been done. In a year, how those 120,000 were calculated. My uncle grew silent. He didn't know how to be grateful. The job was mine. The capital was mine, for I would want a lot. My mother teased after hearing him, and said that when he opened the venture, she had lent the 50,000. Don't you remember that debt? I've worked with you for a year, and you never paid him a fair wage. You have a clear conscience giving him only 120,000. At year's end, my uncle's face reddened. He tried to speak, but couldn't. My mother turned around and left as she passed the warehouse door. The fridge stopped. It looked at me, and there was no reproach in its eyes. Only pain and true acceptance. It uttered 4 words. Do it well that night, as you would dissect it, as you would judge the freshness of the seafood. She learned with great seriousness, taking notes and asking questions. I looked at her and remembered myself a year ago. Back then, I was the same. I believed that if I suffered, my uncle would treat me sincerely, truly. Now I understand that in this world, only your own position is the most reliable at 11 at night. My uncle's post directly opposite still had the light on behind the glass. I saw him there alone, staring fixedly at the ledger, the fridge beside him making a strange sound, and the temperature on the display flickered. I averted my gaze and closed the warehouse door. Tomorrow, there is an urgent order. I cannot afford to fail. On the 5th day of opening, my supply was cut at 4 in the morning. I went to the dock to collect goods as usual. The old Z's ship had already docked, but upon seeing me, he shook his head. He told me, "Oh, I'm sorry. Today's merchandise is already fully reserved by your uncle. The price is 20% higher than market price." I was stunned. I turned around to look for other captains, but afterward, ask everyone. The answer was the same. My uncle had allied with the market and other major players by buying up all local supplies at a price 1% higher than market. I stayed on the empty dock watching the seafood boats hauled away while the cigarette in my hand burned down to the end. On returning to the warehouse, Alan was already waiting for me. Seeing me arrive with empty hands, her face showed concern. I did not say much. I only asked her to go rest. I sat alone in the office and reviewed my contact list. If the local supply is blocked, then I will go outside. I remembered that 2 months ago when I was hauling goods at the new South Dock, I met a captain named Chen. That shipment didn't sell very well at the time. It looked good, but the size was small, and no local vendor wanted to take it. I helped you analyze the market. I suggested lowering the store price, and in 3 days the stock had sold out, as the old man left. Oh, if you ever truly need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I called the old Chen's phone. The phone rang for a long time before answering the old Chen's voice. It sounded drowsy. I got to the point. I asked him if he had merchandise lately. I wanted it all paid in cash. The old Chen remained silent for a moment. Then he asked if something had happened to me. I didn't hide it from him. I told him about my uncle's blocking. After listening, the old man, Chi, hurled an insult, saying that this kind of behavior was shameful. He told me to wait for news after I hung up. It was dawn. I didn't sleep, but I got in the car and headed straight to the South Pier. I drove 3 hours without stopping until I reached the South Dock. It was 10 in the morning and old Che waited for me. Next to a maritime transport truck, the cargo hold was filled with freshly unloaded seafood, so the old Chen took me to inspect merchandise. This lot had just arrived at the port. They were coral groupers and hairy crabs, not top quality, but fresh. The gills were still a vivid red, and the crab's legs were strong. I decided instantly and bought everything right away. I transferred the 180,000 dues at that moment. The old man Che sent the payment notification on his phone. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and said, "You're a gutsy kid. Someone like your uncle will end up bad sooner or later. From now on, you'll have priority choosing merchandise." I spoke with old Chen for a while. He told me that South Dock had only recently been developed, and that many local wholesalers still didn't know this route. The supply source is stable, and prices are about 10% lower than in the north. Also, ship captains are honest and direct. I felt calmer. My uncle thought by controlling the local dock, he could suffocate me, but he didn't know this sea is quite vast. There is more than one dock. I returned to the market with the refrigerated truck full, and Olin was waiting at the door of the refrigerated warehouse. Seeing the truck, his eyes lit. We unloaded the goods overnight. We sorted and weighed the coral groupers and hairy crabs. Not first rate, but their freshness was higher, and the price was 5% lower than the market. I contacted several old clients. They needed the goods and placed their orders right there. That night, at 10, more than half of the cargo had already sold, with 150,000 loos recovered by morning. I drove back to the southern dock. This time, the old man introduced me to 2 more captains who sailed at sea with his officers even steadier. I bargained with them for a collaboration and promised that, as long as the quality stayed good, I would pay everything in cash without delays. The 3 captains conferred for a moment and finally agreed. Juan said, "Oh wow, you have a lot of courage to venture on your own. At such a young age, you have determination. We who sail, we value reputation above all. If you pay in cash, you'll have priority in supply." I shook hands with everyone and got rid of 1 MXN on the way to the city. I got a call. He said my uncle had been at the warehouse today. He paced a few times, watching us unload, and he wore a solemn look. There were a couple of retailers who came to ask where we got the merchandise from and why the price was even lower than the markets. I hung up the phone and I watched the landscape rush by the window. My uncle thought that by raising local price he could force me to leave, but he could not imagine that the more he blocked me, the wider my path grew. Once the South Dock's supply settled very well, my costs were 10% lower than his own, and the price edge clearly showed itself immediately. In the end, I will not be the one left cornered. After stabilizing the South Dock supply, my cold storage business began to prosper for a full week. I went out at 3 in the morning to collect the cargo at the South Dock. I returned to the market before 10 in the morning. These products were very fresh and 10% cheaper than the locals. The retailers tested the advantages, and orders grew by day 10. The old Ocean called to tell me he wanted to talk about a matter, so I drove there the same afternoon. The old Ocean took me to a food stall on the dock, asked for several dishes, and served 2 glasses of liquor. He went straight to the point. "You seem like a trustworthy type. I want to sign the agreement with his exclusive minister." I laid down the chopsticks and looked at him. The old Chetty said there are currently 5 ships operating at the South Dock. Mine, Lao Wang's, and his. Our 3 ships cover half the volume. After this period, I clearly see that you always pay in cash. You are quite skilled at inspections and never complain. We did discuss this among us. We're willing to give you priority, but with a condition. You must guarantee buying at least 2,000 loos per week. Also, the price will be 5% lower than the rest. I did the math. A volume of $200,000 would press hard now, but if I win exclusivity, it would be like controlling the heart of the minister's supply chain. My uncle blocks me by raising local prices. I get the lowest price at the South Dock. With this game, the advantage becomes obvious right away. I shook the old Che's hand. We signed the agreement at the moment. With 3 months duration, I guarantee a weekly volume of 2. They guarantee a steady supply and the best possible price after signing the agreement. He told me something else. He said lately, someone has been using his contacts to learn where I source my goods. They are offering a very high price, trying to snatch this line away. She said, in business, what really matters is reputation. You have truly been loyal to us. We won't do something so ruinous as betraying our word. But beware, your uncle has worked in the area for years and has many tricks up his sleeve. I nodded, aware of it. When we got back to the market, it was already 9. He might still be in the cold storage sorting the merchandise. Seeing me arrive, he immediately told me that today, 3 more retail customers placed orders. Also, there is a restaurant owner who wants to discuss a long-term partnership. The next morning I went to that restaurant. The owner, Mr. Lee, is in his 40s. He runs 2 restaurant chains in the city, and daily seafood consumption is considerable. He told me that previously he always bought the merchandise from my uncle. Lately, the rate of dead fish has been rising fast, and he has complained many times without improvement. I took it to the cold store so he could very clearly see the merchandise. Mr. Liu inspected everything, from the color of the gills to the clarity of the eyes. Finally, he nodded, saying the merchandise is really good indeed. He asked me if he could guarantee a steady supply, so I showed him the exclusive port minister's agreement to seal the deal. After reading it, Mr. Le made his decision on the spot, declaring that from this moment forward, the seafood for his 2 establishments will be purchased entirely from me, at least 50 units weekly. After firing the man, I stood in front of the door to the cold storage, lighting a cigarette at the stall opposite, my uncle's. He was arguing with someone, his voice loud, and through the glass you could see several crates of dead fish on the ground. The temperature is unstable, and most of the merchandise is spoiled. I said nothing. I was just looking ahead. I know those refrigeration units from memory. The compressor on Unit 3 is old. The temp should be checked every 4 hours, and the condenser on Unit 2 has a crack. As the load rises in summer, it begins to lose gas. I know all these defects. That's why last year I kept the dead fish rate below the threshold, but my uncle doesn't understand. He only knows how to do math and talk about influences. He has no idea about quirks of these machines. Without my own assumption, it's like a machine that's missing components. It seems to keep functioning, but in reality, it has already begun to collapse. That same night, my warehouse's daily cash flow surpassed 100,000 for the first time. If he was still excited, he showed me the ledger and said, "Boss, this is sure to bring us profits." I looked at the numbers in the book, but I felt very calm. 100 flow units mean nothing to my uncle at his best moment. He could do 300 a day. The gasoline supply has stabilized, and the major clients have begun to pile up. What needs to be done right now is to gradually eat away at my uncle's market share by midnight. Across from the stall, the light was still on. My uncle sat there alone, staring fixedly at a pile of dead fish. The refrigeration unit beside him gave a sharp, irritating hum, and the display flickered continuously. I lowered the blind and closed the warehouse, and tomorrow at 3 in the morning, I must receive a shipment of king crabs there. 3 weeks after signing the exclusive minister's agreement, my daily cash flow stayed above that very afternoon. That night, I received a sudden call in a grave tone. He told me someone had contacted him, offering 1% more than me to buy the NMA supply. The other is Lally, the person closest to my uncle in the entire market. I felt a sting. I knew that my uncle was starting to play for real. "Oh," Locke said, "that price is tempting. We have talked, and in business, reputation matters. We've only been in the deal for 3 weeks. We can't change our minds like that. I'm calling you to warn you that this time, your uncle is taking it very seriously." I thanked Lao Che. That night, I went to Anmatu. The 3 captains were there. I invited them to dinner, and at dinner, I did not mention the price increase. We talked about how tough it is to go sailing and what the market is like. Laogan said her son will start college next year and still lacks part of the tuition. And at that moment, I told him, "Brother man, I will pay the tuition. Consider it an advance toward the merchandise. We'll deduct it gradually from future supplies." He said his wife was hospitalized and he was short of money. I wired 50 at once. And I told him that money was for the emergency, and there was no hurry to repay it. The 3 captains looked at me, and their eyes showed something new. Losh raised his glass and said, "Ah, you're a man of your word. Even if your uncle offers more." "We won't move." I toasted with them, feeling completely calm. Back at the market, it was already very late. I sat in the office to plan the next steps. The supply at the South Dock held, but my uncle won't stay idle. I'm afraid he will go after the ship's captain. Surely he will attack from another front, and that's how it was. Rumors spread in the market. Some said my merchandise was contraband without quarantine certificates. Other things my cold storage chamber didn't meet standards. It would be shut down at any moment. They also said I am not related to the captain, and my source for his minister is unstable. These comments sounded convincing, and soon, customers started calling to ask. I didn't get nervous directly. I took photos of quarantine certs from South Dock, business license for the cold storage, and the minister's deals, and sent them to the retail group. The rumors faded away, but my uncle did not stop. Market management arrived to inspect the cold storage. They said they had received a complaint. They suspected refrigeration equipment did not meet standards and demanded a halt of operations for inspection. I was prepared before opening the chamber. All the equipment was configured to the highest standards. Quarantine, fire safety, environmental protection, all the certificates were in order. The inspector reviewed for 2 hours and could not find any errors. In the end, he left with nothing after being dismissed. If someone lowered their voice and said, "Boss, today," someone saw that it was his uncle who went to report him to the administration? I nodded. I had these tactics that afternoon. The daily flow of my camera feed reached 150, surpassing my uncle's business, and the news spread quickly through the market. Everyone said there, at dusk, that he had truly triumphed. In front of my uncle's stall, creditors gathered, demanding their payments to block my supply. My uncle hoarded merchandise at the local dock, selling it at high prices, and even joined forces with other stalls to push prices up. His capital chain began to tighten. The fish mortality rate stayed very high, and he lost many customers. His situation was getting harder. If Alan truly gave the number for his uncle's fridge, it broke again today. A whole box of king crabs died, costing at least 80,000. I knew that machine number well. Last summer, when it failed for the first time, I stayed awake for 36 hours straight to repair it. I know each part, every quirk of it, but now it is no longer my responsibility. As night fell, the boss called him to say that his friend also wanted to buy merchandise from me. He owns another restaurant chain in the city, with a weekly order of at least 70,000. I agreed to visit him. The next day, after I hung up, I stood before the fridge. The stall across from me was still lit behind the glass. I could see my uncle there, alone, with a pile of invoices before him. He looked grayer. Her figure looked oddly worn. I looked away and shut the chamber door. Tomorrow a batch of wild yellow Corvinas should arrive soon. The client has already reserved 200 units in the market today. They started whispering in private, saying that my uncle's stall wouldn't last long. His old refrigeration units fail constantly. Fish mortality has risen to 100% indeed. Many loyal customers have begun moving to my side. Quite. If he finished organizing the batch and said excitedly, "Boss, we have a net profit of 500 this month." I looked at the figures in the ledger, feeling calm indeed now. 500 is nothing compared to my uncle's era, but to me, it is the first fortune that truly belongs to me. Late at night, I closed the chamber ready to rest. As I passed my uncle's post, I saw he was still at it, trying to repair machine 3. His movements were rather clumsy. Obviously, he didn't understand any of those circuits and pieces. I stayed for a little while watching from outside, but finally I turned around and left after my camera's daily flow had stabilized at 150. When my uncle started a price war the next morning, word spread through the market. All the seafood at my uncle's stall had a 1% discount, a lost leader liquidation. Many retailers, upon hearing the news, rushed to their own stalls. If someone came to ask me, "Boss, we should lower the prices too," I shook my head. I know exactly what he's doing. My uncle wants to ruin me with a price war, forcing me to lower prices and lose money, or to watch my customers leave. But he got one thing wrong. My cost is 1% lower than his, and my supply is more stable. Crucially, I don't need to compete with him on price. I asked him if he would buy a batch of thermal boxes and cold delivery vehicles. I'll improve service by betting on the high-end route with zero mortality. And be punctual if I didn't understand it well. He said everyone competes on price. Doing this is subtle. I said, at the end of a price war, what matters is who lasts longer, not who wears me down. It's better to take another path for the following 3 days. I didn't lower prices. On the contrary, I focused all energy on service before each batch leaves warehouse. I personally review it to ensure that there isn't a single dead fish. The delivery time is precise with a tolerance of half an hour when the customer needs the goods at that moment. I deliver it first. Indeed, some retailers were drawn in by my uncle's low prices. But very soon problems arose that made it hard to lower the prices now. My uncle began buying inexpensive goods at small docks with inconsistent quality and added to his own refrigeration units. The fish mortality rate stayed high throughout. Many retailers, upon receiving the merchandise, found that though they apparently saved 1% on real costs, they ended up losing money by day 5. Some retailers started returning to me. They'd pay a bit more. Quality mattered most. I didn't say much. I focused on supplying service. Mr. Lug called to say his friend had finished evaluating and would give me all his seafood orders. That is one of the city's largest hotel chains, with weekly volume of at least 100,000. Mr. Ellie told him, "Oh, my friend also went to see your uncle earlier, but his merchandise isn't stable, and there are too many dead fish. Although your prices are a little higher, you have 0 dead fish and you meet deadlines, which is the most important thing for hotels." I met with Mr. Lee's friend, and we signed the cooperation agreement then, starting next week. The weekly order of 100,000 and everything will go right through my cold storage. I returned to the market after signing the deal at sunset. Before my uncle's stall were some boxes of returns. Some retailers were arguing with him. My uncle's face turned red with anger and his voice hoarse. "If Alan said so, your uncle has had many returns these days. Rumor says he paid over 100,000 in refunds." I stood at the door of my chamber, watching the scene that lay ahead. My uncle's price war hardly lasted 10 days before his capital chain began collapsing. It had already grown tight, and now he sold at a loss and paid refunds, utterly unable to endure it. The worst part is that the cheap goods he bought to lower prices completely wrecked his reputation. Many old clients lost trust in him and turned to me that very night. The camera's daily cash flow topped 200,000. Ayin showed me the ledger, excitedly saying that the net profit for this month would exceed 800,000. I looked at the figures in the ledger and felt very calm. Price wars are never won by who cuts prices the most, but by who lasts to the end. My uncle thought low prices would ruin me, but he didn't know that the moat is quality and service, even at night. The light at the stall across from him was still on. My uncle sat there alone with a pile of invoices, no returns before him. Their phone kept ringing. Surely the creditors were collecting their debts. I closed the door to my room and rested. Tomorrow another batch of Australian lobsters comes, the first order for the hotel of Mr. Lee's friend, and I can't afford a single mistake on the way to the market. I looked back once. My uncle's stall looked particularly desolate in the darkness of night, and that sign that had hung for more than 10 years. It swayed with the wind, emitting a creak in the market. It was already whispered in private that my uncle had overstepped this time. The price war did not ruin him, but dragged him into the mud. Others said that by following this trend, my uncle's post wouldn't last. This month, I didn't take part in those talks. I simply kept doing my work in silence the next morning. That batch of Aussie lobsters arrived on time. I checked the goods, sorted them, and distributed them. Achieving a full, perfect service when Mr. Alu's friend received the merchandise, he added. 50% more was added to his order on the spot. He had already lost this price war. 3 days after the war ended, something big happened in the market. The city's biggest buyer, Mr. Z of the Grand Hindon Hotel, would host his son's wedding banquet. He booked 300 tables, and seafood was enormous. Whoever landed this order almost guaranteed his place in the market today. Mr. Zhang's hotel has been open for 20 long years indeed. It has long been the top choice for elite high-end banquets over the years. He always bought his seafood daily from my own uncle. They had a very close, long-standing personal relationship. The wedding was Saturday, and they began preparing the merchandise 3 days before. My uncle bet nearly all his capital, moving goods from several docks, hoping to recover by Friday afternoon. Suddenly, news spread through market. It went badly at Grand Hindon Inn. He ran in and said there was a major problem with the seafood your uncle supplied. Half of the king crabs died, and the Australian lobsters are no longer fresh. Mr. Zhang was furious at the hotel, insisting my uncle replenish merchandise at once or end cooperation. I stood before my walk-in fridge and saw from afar that my uncle's stall was chaos. He was calling to find goods, but it was Friday at dusk. The banquet would start tomorrow at noon. There was no way to bring goods from outside. And about the local docks, I'd already offended them all with their high-priced, aggressive buying. Now, no one wants to sell to him at 6 p.m. The owner Zhang came to market in person. He is about 50 and usually very kind, but this time his face was pale. He stood at my uncle's stall with a loud voice. He said he trusted him after years of cooperation. But what kind of goods did he deliver? 300 wedding banquets? The guests are important people. How can he explain himself to them now? My uncle was sweating buckets, non-stop apologizing, saying he'd find a way to replace it. He said that if by 10 o'clock he didn't deliver quality products, there would be no more business between them. The owner turned around to leave, and he just happened to see me standing in front of the door to my cold storage. He was stunned, came closer, and asked me if I was there. I nodded, and the owner asked me directly, "Do you have merchandise right now?" "I need 50 king crabs, 80 Australian lobsters, and 100 kilos of coral grouper. Everything must stay alive and in shape. You could deliver it to the restaurant by 10 p.m. I checked the inventory in my warehouse. It's not enough today. At the South Dock, Old Chen just received a batch today. I know quality. Moving merchandise from South Dock to the city and then the restaurant leaves little time. It's not impossible. I said I could do it, but I had to inspect quality first to ensure no problems. The owner looked at me briefly in silence for a few seconds and nodded. He said it was his son's wedding, and no mistakes at all. I called Old Chen right away to reserve the lot that arrived at the port today. And then I called Celine. We loaded the freezer truck and went to the South Dock. By the time we arrived, it was 7:30. Old Chin already had everything ready. I checked them one by one, making sure they were alive. After checking, we loaded immediately and headed back. We arrived at the market at 9 o'clock. Ain and I sorted through the night without missing a detail, and by 9:40 the merchandise was loaded, and we headed for the Hindon restaurant. On arriving there, it was exactly 9:55. The owner, Z, was already waiting in the kitchen, and he inspected everything himself. The king crabs were fresh, with sturdy pincers. The Australian lobsters had their slender antennae intact, very full of energy. The coral grouper had a bright red color and clear eyes after inspection, and the owner finally smiled. He gave me a firm pat on the shoulder and said, "Oh, this batch is perfect. You've gotten me out of a real jam." I said that was what I had to do. The owner looked at me and said, "Boy, you've helped me a lot this time." I nodded at the idea of talking with you about a long-term cooperation later. When I got back to the market, it was already 11 at night. My uncle's stall still had the lights on behind the glass. You could see him sitting there, facing it. There were real crabs and dead lobsters. Zhang's phone was on the table. Its screen dark. Zhang, the owner, probably wasn't answering his calls anymore. If Alan called him boss, his uncle is finished. The Hindon restaurant. He's the city's biggest client. Losing him would practically leave him with no chance to recover. I didn't answer. I simply shut the walk-in fridge door tomorrow. I must go to the restaurant to help ensure the wedding goes very well indeed. On Saturday, the wedding day, I reached the Hindon restaurant very early. The kitchen was chaotic. I oversaw seafood prep. The king crab was perfect. The Sammy of Australian lobster was delicious. The steamed grouper was tender. The owner warmly greeted the guests in the hall, continually glancing toward the kitchen with a bright, inviting smile. At noon, the wedding began. Guests at the 300 tables praised the seafood dishes. Some business owners asked right there to the owner where the goods came from, and he answered with a smile. It is supplied by a market youth, something truly hard to say aloud. Lately, at 3 in the afternoon, the owner called me to his office and asked the waiter to seat us there, near the back door. He lit a cigarette and said, "Ah, this time, all thanks to you. If I hadn't lost my reputation." The owner Zhang waved his hand, saying that after so many years with my uncle, things were good at first, but these past 2 years have grown worse. What matters to him is profit, and he is arrogant, and when problems arise, he never admits fault. He only makes excuses about what happened at the wedding. It has become clear to him. The owner said, "Oh, from now on, all seafood for the restaurant will come from you, 2 locations, and at least 200 in volume. On a weekly basis, can you guarantee the supply? I guarantee it. The source at the southern dock is stable, and the quality is assured. Also, I have professional cold chain distribution. Here is the collaboration contract. It takes effect next month. With this order closed, the daily cash flow of my refrigerated warehouse can stabilize above 300 Comac, and I will fully surpass it now, the highest level my uncle reached. What kind of market am I opening on the way?" I got calls from owners who attended the wedding banquet, asking if I could supply them. I wrote down their contacts one by one, with certainty to visit them now. What's whispered in the market? He's secured the Hindon Hotel order, and his business will take off at 8 o'clock at night in front of my warehouse. He watched my uncle's stall on the other side. The light was still on, but the interior was empty. Only he sat there. He had a pile of invoices before him and kept using the calculator. If someone came closer, lowering his voice, the boss said, "I've heard your uncle went today to beg clemency from Mr. Zhang, but he wouldn't even let him in. They say all the merchandise your uncle prepared for this banquet was a loss of at least 300. Since I said nothing, I simply lit a cigarette. This time, my uncle is really finished. The hotel lost its biggest client. Its payment chain has collapsed, on top of losses from the previous price war and usurious loan interest, and it can no longer endure in the market today. There are whispers that it may not make it to the very end of the month. They say old freezers are completely useless. They have no fix. The next day I visited the owners I met at the banquet. They own famed city restaurants and demand high-quality seafood. I took them to the warehouse for them to see the goods. I explained the source at the southern dock and the distribution. Everyone was very satisfied. They signed the collaboration contract on the spot, with Hindon Hotel's order. Now, I have 5 dining places. Over the long run, with a weekly volume above 400, as if Lindy said it with excitement, "Boss now, for the team, of course. Now we've really taken off, guys." I looked at the contract in my hands and felt calm from the start to this moment. In less than 2 months, not only have I established myself, but I've secured higher quality clients in the market. That afternoon, I went to the South Dock to speak with Lao Che and the others. Regarding the supply, Lao Che said there was no problem. They had 2 more ships ready to assign to keep supply steady. On the way back to the market, it was dark. I saw my uncle's stall. There was a group of creditors at the door, shouting for him to pay them. My uncle was there, with his hair in disarray, and his pale face seemed to have aged 10 years. "If, Alan," said the boss. "I heard that your uncle went to the bank today to apply for a loan, but they refused him. Now the debts he has accumulated exceed 1 million. It's impossible for me to pay them." I didn't respond. I simply went back to the warehouse to keep working tomorrow. We must close another order, and we can't delay after securing Hindon's order. The flow in my warehouse stayed above 300 Comac, but I knew it wasn't enough to rely on a few restaurants. Market sellers form the base. Only by bringing them all together can I truly control this market. That afternoon, I gathered a dozen market retailers with whom I have a good relation and trust. These are the people I've worked with this half year. To some, I helped by advancing money to others, solving supply problems as needed. I served you and got straight to my idea right away. I told you competition is fierce and hard to survive on your own these days. I want to form an alliance with their minister focused on my warehouse and cold storage to unify supply, prices, and distribution, joining forces to benefit us all right now. A few people looked at one another, and someone asked how it would work. Specifically, I said it's simple. First, supply will be centrally managed here, ensuring quality and price. Distribution will be unified with my cold chain fleet to cut losses. Third, profits will be distributed proportionally. I'll take 30% and you all take 70%. A retailer named Juan said, your idea is good, but why should we collaborate with you? What if you exploit your advantage in supply? Brother Guan, we've worked together for a long time. I should know what kind of people you are. Also, if I really wanted to pressure you, I could do it right now. I've built this alliance so everyone profits, not that I take it all. Not me alone, really, another retailer asked. Oh, what about your uncle? He's not well right now. He's been in the market for over 10 years. His connections stay there. If we partner with you, he will retaliate. They have nothing to fear, I think. He can barely look after himself now. How will he have energy to deal with you all? Also, in business, what matters is ability, not connections. Several retailers hesitated for a moment and finally nodded. They said, oh, you are a fair person. We trusted you that very same night. I signed an alliance agreement with 13 retailers from next week. All their supplies will come from me. Distribution will be properly unified by my refrigerated trucks. I promise to guarantee a steady supply, best prices, and zero losses. If Lindy said excitedly, boss, with this we've really integrated the market. Once this buy-sell alliance begins, I will control most of his minister's sources and the market's outputs. My uncle's market share will shrink much more, and his situation will be much harder. The alliance began operating officially. I brought a large shipment from Mercosur. I distributed it evenly among alliance members, and the delivery trucks arrived on time as planned. Each batch arrived without losses. Retailers, on receiving the goods, gave thumbs up one after another, saying AI work will be different. Soon, the word spread in the market. There, he had formed a buy and sell alliance. More than a dozen retailers joined. They all supported one another, and business was getting better and better. Hearing the news, my uncle's face looked even worse. His share of the market, which had already been reduced to the minimum by my actions. Now, after I joined with retailers, it cost him his competitive edge. Someone nearby told him that we work with supply is steady and prices are fair. Why should I go back with you? I didn't say anything. I just kept minding my business that afternoon. I got a call from old Ho Chen. He told me that at the South Dock 2 more ships had arrived, and the source of his minister was even more abundant, really. He asked me yes, I could increase the volume of his minister. They had too much merchandise there, and they needed stable commercial outlets. I said there was no problem. Now, with the alliance, my sales channels were completely open. I could absorb any amount of merchandise. After hanging up, I stood in front of the door to the cold storage room, looking at my uncle's stall in front of me that was arguing with a creditor. The volume was very loud. The creditor pointed at his face and yelled that he had borrowed money. He had to pay it back. Why stop making excuses? My uncle, with his face flushed, kept trying to explain himself, asking for a few more days. He swore he would find a way to pay, but the creditor didn't want to listen and threatened him. If you don't pay this week, I will report you to the court immediately. If he even came up and, lowering his voice, said, Boss, I've heard that your uncle's debt already exceeds 1.5 million euros. Even if he mortgaged his job, it wouldn't be enough to pay. He's really in a dead end, no way out. I stood before the chamber door, watching the market, all lit with people, coming and going in a busy, bustling scene. Meanwhile, my uncle's stall in front of me looked strangely empty and silent. If Aylin called him boss, the market crowd say you are the real boss here today. Your uncle's era, has it passed already, or not? I didn't answer. I simply shut the door to the cold room for now. Tomorrow, more king crabs arrive. The alliance members have already reserved 500, as you are impeded. This market is mine now. The alliance for buying and selling ran for 2 weeks, and everything went smoothly. My daily cash flow in the refrigerated chamber stayed above 400, and my market share was already at 60% that afternoon as I inventoried the chamber. Old Che called suddenly in a very urgent voice. He said the weather observatory had issued a typhoon alert. A super typhoon would make landfall in 3 days, and all ships at sea must return to port to shelter. This meant at least a full week without fresh seafood in the market. I felt a jolt in my heart, and I asked him at once if they could still unload the goods. Che said today was the last day, and from tomorrow, all ships must return to port. He told me he still had a batch left, and he asked if I wanted it. I said I'd take it all and I'd leave at once after I hung up. I called it that too, and we went straight to the South Dock in the reefer truck while I drove. I calculated that the typhoon would leave the market short of provisions, and seafood prices would rise. If I could stock enough merchandise ahead, I would not only guarantee supplies for the alliance, but also stabilize the market. I reached the southern dock at dusk. Old Che and his crew were unloading heavy merchandise urgently. The dock was crowded with people. I bought it all on the spot and wired the 300,000 dues immediately. The old Che said, "Oh, this typhoon is coming in strong. Get ready." I calculated at least a week of interruption, and the market would have no stop. I nodded, saying I had it in control. We moved the merchandise back to market overnight. It was 11 p.m. when we finished. Aline and I began sorting, packing, and storing. I thoroughly reviewed it. The backup generator for the refrigerated chamber to keep power from failing during the typhoon. The next morning, rumors about the storm began to fill the market soon. Many stall owners tried to stock up now, but most ships had returned to port, so it was impossible to buy anything. If someone said the boss is in the market, everyone is desperate to obtain merchandise and prices have already risen by 1%. I replied, don't worry. First, let's secure the supply for the members of the Alliance, and then we'll see what we do with the surplus. I was gathering the members of the Alliance for a meeting. I told them that the typhoon was approaching and that the market would run out of supplies for at least a week, but that I had stored enough in advance, guaranteeing that their supplies would not be affected and that prices would not rise. Several small merchants sighed with relief, saying, oh, you do have vision for the future. Otherwise, we would all have had to close after the meeting. Other stallholders began to look for me, wanting to buy merchandise at high prices, but I turned them all away, saying that the priority was the Alliance members. In the afternoon, I learned that my uncle was also preparing merchandise. If he told me my uncle had taken out usury loans and bought merchandise at high prices in small, crowded ports, hoping to make a fortune during the typhoon and recover, I felt my heart sinking fast, right then, anxious, truly. My uncle stood on the ropes, betting all on a single hand, but his old fridges couldn't bear such cargo now. If something went wrong, losses would be devastating at dusk. I went especially to see my uncle's small stall. He was guiding his workers to move the goods to the cold storage with a strange smile on his face. His refrigeration machines were running at full power, emitting a truly deafening roar. I stood facing those old machines, watching them with a sense of ominous foreboding. If Alan drew closer and spoke softly, boss, the merchandise his uncle has accumulated must be at least 500,000 dues. Could Alan's old machines withstand it? I shook my head, saying nothing. That night, I checked all the equipment again in my refrigerated chamber. The refrigerators were operating normally, and the temperature remained at 5 degrees below zero. Backup generator tests were ready to be run. I prepared several small generators, just in case, at midnight, standing before warehouse door. I looked at the sky. Dark clouds began to gather, and the wind rose quickly. The forecast said the dead man would fall to earth in the pre-dawn hours of the day after tomorrow, with winds up to 14 degrees. My uncle's stall across from mine stayed lit behind the glass. I could easily see him sitting there alone, facing his merchandise, with a smile of anticipation. He believed this typhoon was his chance to be reborn, not knowing that this could be the drop that would brim the glass. The following day, the typhoon was coming closer. The sky was leaden and gray. The winds had already reached the 8th degree, and many market stalls had begun closing early to prepare for the storm. I asked C. Aline to recheck equipment to ensure nothing failed. Alliance members prepared to keep operating after the typhoon. At 4 in the afternoon, I got a call from Chen saying the typhoon was stronger than expected and that I should be careful. Their ships had already returned back to port to be reinforced, and the dock was clear. I replied, don't worry, I am well prepared. After hanging up, I stood in front of the refrigerated chamber watching the sky darken. The wind was blowing harder, and the first drops of rain began to fall. At my uncle's place, he kept working, but I noticed that the screen on his refrigerator, number 3, started blinking and the temperature grew unstable. I felt a pang. I knew it all too well. That machine was a sign that it would soon fail. The coastal typhoon and a windstorm with rain battered the city. Along the street, the advertising signs were torn down completely. The trees split in half, and the market lay in darkness, except for the emergency lights of a few stalls. Aline and I were monitoring the refrigerated store, watching the equipment's operation closely. The cooling system worked normally, the temperature stayed steady, and the backup power supply was ready at any given moment. If anyone leaned against the window, looking out, he suddenly said, "Boss, it seems something indeed happened at your uncle's post." I drew nearer and looked to the front through the veil of rain. My uncle's post was in gloom. All the refrigerators had stopped, and he was inside there, moving from side to side with a flashlight. Clearly, I was looking for reserve stock, but I had made no plans. He said to the boss, "If there is still no power, all the goods inside will spoil." I didn't say anything at all and kept watching my equipment closely. The typhoon lasted 6 full hours. The wind and rain gradually subsided. The sky began to clear, and I left the cold store, finally. The market was a total disaster. There was dead seafood scattered all over the ground. The stench of rot could be smelled from far away. If Alan called him boss, your uncle's matter is finished. 6 hours without power, and all refrigeration is stopped. 500,000 in merchandise is spoiled. I drew closer to take a look at the king crabs. The Australian lobsters and star groupers had become a mass of rotten flesh. My uncle sat there with a very empty gaze, as if his soul had been torn from him. A flicker of true emotion crossed his eyes when he saw me, but in the end, he said nothing. He simply bowed his head. I turned around and walked away without looking back at him. Back at the warehouse, I began counting the stock with 0 losses from the typhoon. All seafood was alive. I immediately notified the Alliance members we could supply as usual at 10 a.m. The market began to resume activity, but most stalls had suffered heavy losses due to the power outage and had no merchandise to sell in the market. But soon only my warehouse was still functioning normally. The only place with stock was ISY Food. The buyers from the major restaurants called one after another. asking if I could supply them. I said yes, but prices would follow the market trend after the typhoon. Seafood was scarce. Prices have risen, allies have priority and keep their prices for the other customers. That very day's market price, my warehouse was packed. Retail restaurant owners, including owners of other stalls, came to seek merchandise I supplied on a first-come, first-served basis, making sure each customer received his share, but not hoarding or speculating. He said so excitedly, "Boss, today's revenue has topped $1 million, indeed." No, I said nothing. It wasn't the result I wanted, but that's market law. The prepared survive, the unprepared are eliminated. He who is not eliminated. At 3 in the afternoon, several creditors came to my uncle's stall. Seeing that pile of dead seafood, they grew pale. One of them pointed at my uncle and said, "Old Lee, how will you repay the money you borrowed, and how much is all this junk worth?" Uncle was there. With his head bowed, he kept repeating that they'd give him a little more time, that he would find a way to pay. The creditors did not listen, and outright said that if he did not pay within 3 days, they would sue him in court. They would seize his post. My uncle seemed to have lost all strength. If he leaned against the wall, he couldn't utter a word. If Alan called him boss, your uncle has lost all his merchandise worth 500,000 and also owes more than 1,000,000. He will never recover. I stood at the warehouse door, watching the scene before me without feeling anything inside. That night, the typhoon ended completely and the sky cleared. I stood at the market entrance, gazing up at the star-studded sky. This typhoon has completely changed market structure in front of me at my uncle's stall. The light was still on. He was there, sitting alone, facing that pile of rotten seafood, unable to move. Those refrigeration machines were left totally. The screens were black, and there was no fix on the market at all. People whispered that my dear old uncle was finished. He bet it all before the typhoon hit. He took usury loans to store goods, and suddenly everything went to hell. Now not only can he not recover, but he has even more debts. The next day, the old Che phoned and said that after the typhoon, the fishing boats had begun to sail out to fish, and that in 3 days there would be new merchandise at the port. He asked how much I needed. I told him to prepare double what we had before. Now the market is short, demand is high. After hanging up, I stood before the cold storage room. I looked carefully over the market and saw that after the typhoon passed, many stalls were clearing their losses. Some even closed their doors. But in my cold storage, business is better than before. That afternoon, I was inside the refrigerated chamber taking stock of the new merchandise. He stepped closer and said, "Boss, my uncle is at the door. He says he wants to see him." I looked up and saw my uncle through the glass, standing outside on the doorstep. He had disheveled hair and a drawn face. He looked really worse for wear when he saw me, and his lips trembled. After a long moment, he managed to utter 2 words. "Oh, I lit a cigarette." I didn't say anything, waiting for him to speak. My uncle kept silent for a while. Finally, he said, "I need to ask you a favor. Could you lend me money?" I looked at him, not answering. My uncle kept going through the night of the typhoon. All my merchandise got ruined. Now creditors come daily. They'll take me to court. I'm in a dead-end alley with no escape. You couldn't help your uncle considering we're family. I flicked the ash from my cigarette and calmly asked, "Uncle, how much do you owe right now, please?" My uncle, with his gaze lowered, said with interest, "Millions." I told him millions is not a small amount. My uncle slowly raised his eyes. Something clearly reddened in his eyes too, and he said, "Ah, I know I let you down in the past. The 120 pound oro thing was my mistake. Now that your business is so big, 1.6 million doesn't mean anything to you. Lend it to me, and I swear I will pay you back." I looked at him and said, "Man, how are you going to pay?" My uncle was stunned and replied, "I still have that job, although now it's not worth much. The location remains good when I recover. I'll return the principal with interest in full." I smiled and said, "Uncle, do you think you can recover?" My dear uncle was completely speechless by my question. His face was red with shame. I kept on. Before the typhoon, the weather station issued alerts. Everyone knew they should prepare spare generators now. You didn't prepare yourself, and in a desperate act, you took out usurious loans to stockpile merchandise. That was your own lesson. Now that things have gone wrong, you come here to ask me for money. What right do you have? My uncle said, "Oh, we're family." I told him, "Uncle, when you distributed the profits, you did not treat me as family. For 365 days a year, I sacrificed myself by working for you. You gave me 120 comments, saying it was mere cheap labor. Now that you're in trouble, you remember we are family." My uncle stood mute there, as if every strength had been taken from him. I stubbed out the cigarette and said, "Uncle, I can help you, but I won't lend you money." My uncle's eyes lit up and he said, "Tell me, while I can get through this crisis, I will accept any condition." I told him, "After you hand me your post, I'll set aside 1.6 million to help you settle your debts." My uncle stood utterly stunned, saying nothing for a long while. I showed him that post is now just an empty shell, and the cooling systems are useless. The customers have also left, and even if you don't hand it over to me, the creditors will seize it through the court. Rather than being seized, it's better to sell it to me. At least then he can settle his debts and avoid going to jail. My uncle's face turned pale, and with his lips trembling, he said, "Oh, that job is the fruit of 10 years of my effort." The effort doesn't pay debts. Now he only has 2 options. Either you transfer the post to me, settle your debts, and start from scratch, or wait to be sued and have the post seized, and, on top of that, end up in jail. You decide for yourself. My uncle stood there frozen. He looked at me with fury in his eyes. There was resentment. But in the end, it all turned into impotence. He said, "Oh, you can raise the price a little." I shook my head, indicating that spending $6 million is the market price. Given his current position there, it's already quite good that it's worth that much. My uncle remained silent for a while, and finally lowered his head and said, "I'll think about it." I told him, "Uncle, the deadline the creditors gave you is 3 days. Today is day 2. You don't have much time to think right now." My uncle said nothing else. He turned around and walked away. His back was bent, and he walked slowly, as if he'd aged 10 years. That night, I got the news of what? The creditors came back to my uncle's stall. This time, they brought several men and hauled merchandise from the shop, saying that if I didn't pay by tomorrow, they would report me to court. My uncle stood at the door, just watching as they carried off their things, unable to utter a word. The next morning, my uncle returned. He simply had a document in his hand. The property's deed for the place lay before me in silence for a long while, until he finally handed me the document and said, "I agree." I received the document. I looked it over and said, "Uncle, we will go to the notary this afternoon to do the paperwork." My uncle nodded and left. At the door, he paused. Then he looked back and said, "Oh, you've won." I said nothing. I just saw it. Leaving that very afternoon. I finished the paperwork and at once began remodeling, tearing down the old stall to enlarge the cold room. I stood before the warehouse entrance, seeing the stall across from me that would soon be mine. The sign had hung there for more than 10 years, still up, but soon would be replaced by A-High Food. The day after signing the transfer agreement, I started remodeling the store and hired a team. I joined my uncle's aging, weathered stall to my cold room. I knocked down the dividing wall, and the space instantly doubled indeed. I ordered 6 imported chillers, brand new, with the most advanced temperature controls and backup power. I expanded the delivery fleet to 5 trucks, letting me serve more clients at once during the remodel. There were ongoing comments in the market. Some said, alas, he was a merciless man who would not forgive even his own uncle. Others said that if the uncle had treated him better then, he wouldn't have ended up that way. I ignored those comments entirely. I focused on the work's progress. A week later, the new post was finished. A huge space of 1,000 square meters, 6 new fridge units aligned perfectly, delivery trucks parked at the door, and the Sagi Seafood distributor sign glowed brilliantly under the bright sun on the very opening day. I held no ceremony. I only notified Alliance members and some very important clients, but the news spread anyway. Almost the entire market came to look around. The boss arrived with several restaurant owners to congratulate me. He looked at the scale of the business, gave a thumbs up, and said, "Ah, in just a few months, you've integrated the market this way. Amazing." Alliance members came, 13 retailers. They stood in front of the new stall with smiles on their faces. They said that working with me has earned them more in these 2 months than in the entire previous year. I said that if we all do our best, the future will be even better. Opening day. The daily cash flow exceeded 5 million with orders from morning to night. 5 delivery vehicles were coming and going non-stop, and all the customers received their goods on time. If he showed me the ledger with enthusiasm and said, "Boss, with this pace this month, we will exceed 3 million in net profit," I nodded. 3 million. They were my uncle's and my net profit for the entire last year. Now, doing it in 1 month is completely safe. I stood in front of the stall and watched the whole market. The place where my uncle's stall used to be was now mine. That night, I gathered the members of the Alliance and the key employees for a meeting. I told them that starting next month, I would take the 100 and you would keep the 80. The retailers were astonished, and one with the surname Guan said, "Boss, how is this possible? You supply the merchandise and the distribution, and you also bear the risks." 100% is little. I replied, "Brother, today. Now that my scale has grown and the volume rose, 100% is not small, giving you more today. They will stay motivated to work with me." Several retailers' eyes welled up, and they said it was worth working with you. After the meeting, I stood before the stall as the market lit and full of people coming and going for you. Things are very hectic. If Aline tells me Uncle came today, he stood long at the entrance watching our new stall, and finally he left without saying a word. The uncle took one of those for about 6 million and paid all his debts. But in this market, its more than 10-year foundations have disappeared completely. Now he is just an ordinary man. No longer is he the stall owner full of arrogance late at night. I closed the stall door and prepared to rest. As I passed the market entrance, I saw a familiar figure standing there. It was the uncle. He stood at the market entrance watching the bright interior lights, watching the sign. A signboard bearing a very complex look. I approached and I stayed by his side without uttering a word. The man looked at me after a long, quiet silence. Finally, he said, "Oh, do a good job." Having said that, he turned around and walked away. I no longer retained the momentum of that old market boss who began with 120,000. In less than 3 months, I launched a total counteroffensive. The market's biggest stall, the most stable supply source, the customers of highest quality, everything is in my hands. This market is mine now. This year ends as I started with 120,000. From that break to controlling the entire market, it feels like a lifetime. That night, all the employees and Alliance members gathered, and we set up more than 10 tables at the new post. Si Alin, the old Che, the old Juan, the old Zhao, and the 13 retailers, everyone who has followed along. The whole team that has fought with me is here. I stood up, raised my glass, and said thanks to everyone for their support this year. Today is the day to share year-end benefits. I keep my word. If Aylin was first to get her share, I gave her a hat with 200K inside. Her starting salary was $12,000 a month, and I promised year-end bonus, and she did good work. Those $200,000 are what she deserves. The 13 retailers. They also got their fair share as agreed. The profit split was 80 to 20. They took the larger part indeed. Each one received hundreds of thousands, some even more than 1 million in total. If even the retailers were so excited that they couldn't speak before working for others. They worked all year and barely earned 100,000. After a few months, they earned more than in years past. I said that if everyone follows my lead, I won't let them down. Let's keep working hard. Next year will be even better for all of us. Old Che and other ship captains came, and I prepared a generous gift for each of them. Thank you for your support during this year. Old Chen gave me a pat on the shoulder and said, "Ah, you are a loyal and brave boy. We were not wrong about you." After a few drinks, the mood grew warm. Some retailers began to remember what had happened these months. They said that, at the beginning, no one in the market trusted me. People thought I, being so young, couldn't beat my uncle. But who could imagine that in a few months, the situation would be turned around completely? The banquet has ended. It was already very late. Wing stood by the stall when Seely came over and handed me a ledger, saying, from opening to today indeed. Total cash flow is 23 million in cash, and the net profit is 5 million. I took the book and read the numbers last year, while working all year with my uncle. The total cash flow was over 5 million. The net profit is 2.5 million, and I only received 100,000 this year, working on my own for less than 3 months indeed. The net profit tripled last year. This year, I learned many lessons. The rules only apply if you have them in your own hands. The capital was his. The relationships were his. That's why he decided the post is mine and the supply is mine. The customers are mine. I decide, but I won't be like my uncle who only cared to exploit me. In the end, he ended up quite alone and betrayed. What I must do is to openly and fairly allow those who follow me to also earn money. Only then can we go farther together. If Aline tells me, my uncle now works in a small restaurant kitchen, gradually moving from owning a stall to being an employee. That stark contrast. It's not something anyone can bear, but it showed clearly how he treated me back then. This is how I harvest now at 12 midnight. I close the stall door. The New Year's bells are about to ring, and the market is starting to light firecrackers. I am standing under the Saji Aquatic Products wholesale sign, looking at this square meter stall, looking at those 6 new refrigeration units, looking at the 5 cold chain trucks parked at the entrance, from 120,000 to 8.5 million. From being an exploited employee to become the market's biggest supplier. It took me less than 3 months this year. I learned the most important thing. Rules only give you true confidence when they are in your own hands. If Aline comes closer and says, "Boss, Happy New Year," I smiled and replied, "Happy New Year" in the sky. From afar, the fireworks begin to bloom with colored lights illuminating the whole market. Standing at the door of the stall, I watch everything with a calm heart. Next year, I want to grow even more. Not only do I want to control this market, but I want to expand the business to nearby cities and farther away. But now I want to go home to have dinner on New Year's Eve with my mother, take out my phone, and send her a message. "Mom, tomorrow I will go home." The phone responds very quickly. "It's okay, Mom is waiting for you." I put the phone away, close the stall door, and drive off from the market in the rearview mirror. There is a sign for the